why it will never happen, is that it's bound to be subject to endless judicial reviews and appeals by the local residents against it going forward. And one thing that the Chinese don't understand is the difference between the rule of law and rule by laws. They think once the British government have said, OK, we're in favour of the embassy, it'll happen. Well, it's going to go through tortuous arguments in courts and out of courts over the next few years, as the local residents, perfectly reasonably, bring forward their objections. So if you think that the Chinese embassy is going to rise like, I don't know, a great palace for China in the middle of London, I don't think that's going to happen in the near term.
Look, let's crack on. Keir Starmer has landed in China. He's the first Prime Minister to visit there since Theresa May went in 2018. Times Radio's political editor Anna Mikhailova is with him, sent us this voice note as they landed.
I've just landed in Beijing, where Keir Starmer is about to be greeted with the Guard of Honour before taken into the city by motorcade to begin his first meeting of the trip. Before landing, the Prime Minister actually took to the airwaves and broadcast from the flight deck, saying that it was a historic visit. He even joked that he'll be bringing the plane in, I think continuing his running Top Gun theme with Emmanuel Macron. He says the visit will unlock opportunity and saying that failing to engage with China would be the equivalent of the UK burying its head in the sand. So on we go. We're about to leave the airport and start the trip.
That's our very own Anna Mikhailova speaking there from China. You'll hear updates from her over the course of Starmer's trip here on Times Radio. Meanwhile, this morning, Carol, the Times reports that Starmer and his team are travelling with burner phones and laptops following concerns about potential Chinese surveillance. This doesn't sound like the most trusting start to our fresh relationship.
It doesn't, does it? And he says he's going because obviously for diplomacy, and we want them to help us grow economically, but he wants to put an end to this push-pull, we love them, we hate them. But we're caught in this dilemma of we don't trust them, but we want them to help us. We're going to give them an embassy, but we're not going to give them a turbine factory. You know, we are so conflicted about how we feel going into it. He was downplaying the security concerns, yet they're going loaded up with burner phones and throwaway laptops, which I didn't even know existed.
Chromebooks, I'm guessing. Let's speak now to Lord Patten, Conservative peer and the last governor of Hong Kong. Lord Patten, good morning. Lord Patten, are you with us?
Speaker. I don't have a burner phone with me.
Right. I'm hoping.
Nice to talk to Times Radio.
I'm hoping we are secure, Lord Patten, but we shall find out. Look, are you in favour of this trip? Do you think it should be happening?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Lord Patten? No.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I can hear you fine.
Oh, good.
Excellent. Lord Patten, are you in favour of this trip happening?
I guess so. I mean, always in favour of people trying to broaden their mind. But I do think there's a lot of rubbish talked about it. The Prime Minister has talked about not wanting a golden age with China, not wanting an ice age. Well, that's all very well. What we actually want is a realistic age. And that should include recognising that, as MI5 have said, China is involved in espionage on an epic scale. The Chinese people may be friends. The Chinese Communist Party isn't a friend of Britain. It's not a friend of any state that isn't authoritarian and doesn't accept its tutelage. So it's a difficult trip for him. And I think we should be realistic about what can come out of it. I don't think there'll be a huge increase in trade. The Chinese at the present have about twice as much in their exports of goods to the UK as we have in exports to good to them. And that isn't affected very much by whether or not you shake the president's hand. It may have a small impact, but by and large, the Chinese buy what they want at the best price they can get, like everybody else. And that isn't greatly affected by whether you polish their boots.
I mean, you have said in the past, Lord Patten, that the UK should stop pretending that criticising China hurts business. I mean, does that mean that the Prime Minister really he has a lot more leeway to speak out on the various things he should speak out on, whether it's espionage, whether it's human rights, than he seems to feel?
Yeah, I think he should start with things which should really hurt in Britain, and one of them is the case of Jimmy Lai, who is a British citizen, who has been locked up in solitary confinement for 5 years, really because he believes in the same sort of things that you and I believe in: freedom of press. He was a passionate advocate of democracy in Hong Kong, having been a stowaway from China to Hong Kong years ago. He was one of those Hong Kong citizens who had actually come from China to find refuge in a British colony. And the first thing the Prime Minister should do, indeed, I would have made it a condition for going, is to insist on Jimmy Lai being released from his solitary confinement and being allowed, he's a practicing Catholic, to receive communion again, and to be free to do all the things which China promised it would allow in the joint declaration, which was a solemn treaty signed between Britain and China and lodged at the UN. And a reminder, I'm afraid, of the fact that while we do want China to sign up to international agreements, we should recognize that it normally breaks them when it doesn't suit them.
I mean, concerning the crackdown in Hong Kong, but I suppose not just Hong Kong, have you been surprised at the direction China's taken in recent decades? Was it what you expected?
No. I mean, there was, I think, an unrealistic expectation that economic change, changes in industrial production and so on, would all in due course produce democracy and produce political change. I think that was a sort of comfortable feeling that people had back in the 80s and 90s. But I think one should have recognized that the Chinese Communist Party has resisted every attempt to change. It's been resistant to change in every respect because it thinks that any change weakens its control. And to use a phrase which is much used these days, it thought that Hong Kong, with free speech and rule of law, represented an existential threat to China. So, I mean, one of the things that Chinese exiles, Hong Kong exiles in the UK say, which goes right to the heart of the matter, when you say to them, wasn't it a terrible wrench leaving Hong Kong and leaving your home and your friends and your job and so on? They say, yes, it was. So you say, well, why did you come? And they say again and again, and there's probably well over 100,000 of them in Britain now, they say again and again, we wanted to bring up their children, our children in freedom. And that's something that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't entirely comprehend, but it's rather terrified by the idea.
Speaking as a former governor, what do you make of the new embassy that's being planned in London? Because speaking on this show yesterday, Ian Wilson likened it to a sort of Chinese governor's residence in the heart of London. Is that how it appears to you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my view is, which isn't shared by many, is that it'll never happen. And why do I think it'll never happen? And why will it be a continuing embarrassment to the UK? And I'm sorry that Starmer's been landed with it now. Why it will never happen is that it's bound to be subject to endless judicial reviews and appeals by the local residents against it going forward. And one thing that the Chinese don't understand is the difference between the rule of law and rule by laws. They think once the British government have said, OK, we're in favour of the embassy, it'll happen. Well, it's going to go through tortuous arguments in courts and out of courts over the next few years, as the local residents, perfectly reasonably, bring forward their objections. So if you think that the Chinese embassy is going to rise like, I don't know, a great palace for China in the middle of London, I don't think that's going to happen in the near term. In the longer term, what worries people is whether it becomes a centre for surveillance as well as espionage. I'm not so concerned about the espionage because that's happening anyway. You don't need an embassy for that. But there is a worry about whether it'll increase surveillance of Chinese dissidents, of Hong Kongers in the UK. And that's a real threat. There was a wonderful cartoon in one of the newspapers, it wasn't actually the Times, a couple of days ago, with Chinese people looking over what was obviously a wall of an embassy. And the sign underneath said Neighbourhood Watch Scheme. And I think there's a real nervousness about that. Would I have gone ahead with it in the first place? No, I probably wouldn't. Does it really matter very much in the big relationship? only because the Chinese, if it doesn't go ahead, will be completely perplexed at why it is we broke our word, because we have the rule of law, not rule by laws.
What leverage does Keir Starmer have with the Chinese? If he was to speak up more over Jimmy Lai, over human rights generally, if he was to have put up more of a fight over the embassy, would it have affected Chinese policy towards the UK at all? Let alone Chinese policy within China.
No, well, probably not immediately. But if you don't raise those things, the Chinese are rather surprised because they know you're expected to believe in them. And what I found with China was usually the thing that most turned them off was if you surprised them by suddenly doing things which you hadn't told them about in advance. When I was a European External Affairs Commissioner, we opened an office in Taiwan. Because the Taiwanese had joined the WTO. And there was immediate fuss by the Chinese, but it wasn't too bad because we told them in the beginning, that we're going to do it. What the Chinese hate is being taken by surprise. It certainly takes them by surprise. If you go to China as somebody who's allegedly a believer in democracy and the rule of law and don't actually raise those issues. And I think one should be very careful about how you do it. There's a tendency in these things to think that the Chinese have the mandate of heaven and you can't possibly say anything which doesn't involve a certain amount of shoe polishing for them. It's complete drivel, I think. The Chinese are surprised when business leaders turn up and tell them all this stuff about democracy is overrated. What's the difference in a free society and China? China's free. You say all that sort of stuff to them and they know you're simply trying to curry favor with them. The Chinese, I think, respect being talked to in a perfectly friendly, reasonable manner, but saying things that they know you believe. The most important thing I've always thought about government in a free society was Adlai Stevenson's remark that free society should not only be prepared to fight for their values, but should live up to them. And you don't live up to them. And it's to some extent the same as our policy or attitude to America under the worst president of my lifetime. But you really have to make clear that your values aren't just something you stick on the wall and don't take any notice of, but you actually believe in them.
Yeah. Look, while I have you, Lord Patten, you're not just the last governor of Hong Kong. You were also, of course, at one point the Conservative Party chairman. What's your message today to Tories who are thinking of defecting following Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman and various others?
Well, don't forget, Hugo, that I was chairman of the Conservative Party when there was one. And it's gone through the tortures of the damned over the last few years, really partly a consequence of leaving the European Union, which did so much damage to our economy and so much damage to our political culture. And it's worth noting that people who are leaving the Conservative Party now for reform, for Mr. Farage's party, are some of those who made the Conservative government and Conservative Party so unpopular for so many years. I mean, I think the most important thing that's happened is that the former head of the Conservative Party in Scotland and a very fine Conservative mayor in the West Midlands, Andy Street, have started with a group of like-minded centre-right Conservatives an attempt to put together the sort of policies which would appeal to moderate Conservatives. If you drive all the moderate Conservatives out of the Conservative Party, there isn't a Conservative Party anymore. And the Liberal Democrats win loads of seats in all over the country, probably more than Reform would. You don't actually beat Reform by trying to ape it. Reform is a rather nasty populist view of the country, which would actually further demolish our reputation in the world and damage our economy.
Lord Patten, thanks very much indeed for your time. That's Lord Patten there, our Conservative peer and also the last governor of Hong Kong. Great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for your time.